Hi, I'm Byron York.
I'm Michael Barone.
And I think it's time to talk about Donald Trump.
Amazingly
enough,
the
we're
real
going to
estate
talk about
investor.
Donald Trump.
Okay.
Is he acting more like a regular candidate? There was this moment where Trump seemed to be existing only on feuds. He's feuding with Marco Rubio, he's feuding with Jeb Bush, he's feuding with Fox News.
Megyn Kelly.
It's just a bunch of feuds. And, you know, you thought, boy, he really needs to roll out some sort of policy or something.
Well, he did roll out an immigration policy several weeks ago, which had its intelligent points and its absurd points.
Good and bad. So, what now? But now he rolls out a tax policy. And actually, it seems to have sort of helped him gain a little equilibrium now.
Well, he's one of the things his tax policy does is to establish that he's, for this election and for that on that issue, kind of a Republican. He's talking about substantial tax cuts, probably huge budget deficits. He says he'll, figure that out.
Right.
So make a deal with somebody.
It's not going to be revenue neutral.
It's not going to be revenue neutral, but it's and some seriously lower corporate income tax, which just about every policymaker agrees is a good thing, but which is something that's always been a little hard for a candidate to say, well, I want corporations to pay less in tax.
Does it seem like he may have been teasing a little bit in the run-up to this, where he says, these hedge fund guys are going to have to pay more. The hedge fund guys are going to pay more. Maybe the wealthy, super wealthy in general, have to pay more. And it doesn't really look like that's going to be much of that.
The question is this business of carried interest, which is a form of investment that hedge fund people make, and should it be treated as capital gains or should it be treated as ordinary income? In current tax schedules, you pay a lot more higher rate on ordinary income than capital gains. So, some of these people make a lot of money. They pay capital gain on it. It's I think 0.1% of the federal revenue or something
it's
like
not
that.
A huge revenue, but it's a big political thing.
But he's calling for a lower income tax rate, ordinary income tax rate of 25%, which is even a little lower than the 1986 Reagan Democratic House tax reform of 28. The carried interest guys are already paying under cap gains nearly that high rate anyway.
That's exactly right. They're paying 23.8%, so they may have to pay 25%. A little bit of an increase.
A rounding error for the kind of people we're talking about.
But it's not the populist pitchforks that we might have been thinking before then. As far as his polling is concerned, every time I say something about Trump's polling, a lot of my Twitter followers are just very sensitive about this. They think I'm running Trump down. But clearly, I think what happened was he was rising up through August, and the first week or so in September hit the 30% mark, I think, in several polls, and now seems to be sort of in the low 20s, still in most polls with a substantial lead over the rest of the field.
In most polls, and it has to be said that his favorable ratings among the Republicans generally also rose during that period.
That's right.
He started off with less than 50% favorables when the controversies were hitting in July and August. He rose above that, so let's
and that is
give
a big
him credit
deal
for
because he had such high name recognition. I mean, that was interesting. It's rare you see somebody who has almost universal name recognition like Hillary Clinton does. It's rare you see them actually improve their favorables somewhat. Well, and Trump managed to do that.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how, but he did. And he did. But it's interesting now. The poll numbers are coming down a little bit. He's still, in first place just about everywhere. It's interesting. He gets more serious on policy issues with a tax plan that has some intellectual heft to it, some policy heft. And comes down slightly in the polls. I guess, he may take it as an instance of no good deed.
Get back to those feuds fast.
No good deed goes unpunished.
All right, well, let's go on to the domestic political ramifications of this new Russian aggression moving into Syria, allegedly under the pretext of fighting ISIS, but actually fighting Bashar al-Assad's enemies. This is something
a few people, at least, that the United States has
trained,
identified as
spent
people.
Zillions of dollars training, and so this is something that took the White House completely by
surprise. And it's not as if they hadn't had some contact. This came, I believe, 2 days after President Obama met with President Putin in New York, in connection with the UN General Assembly session. and you didn't get much of a heads up. And it's
none.
And you had pictures of Secretary of State John Kerry with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. There was no picture of Lavrov actually taking a glove off and slapping Kerry across the face, but poor Secretary Kerry was talking about deconflicting the thing, and the Russians operatives in the Middle East basically said, you have 1 hour to get U.S. aircraft out of the way.
We're coming in.
That's not a picture that most Americans want to see the United States facing the world.
Every single Republican candidate has portrayed, in the days before this happened, has portrayed the president as feckless, as weak, as without a policy in this whole situation. Does it benefit any particular Republican candidate to see this just terrible mess?
Well, it doesn't benefit Rand Paul, who's taken a somewhat less interventionist stand on foreign policy issues generally. Now, I think what it does, Byron, is it affects the climate. What was with Peter Hart, the Democratic pollster, we call the climate of opinion. Are things spinning out of control in the world? Is the United States being kicked around in various ways? And starting with the beheadings of Americans in August 2014 by the ISIS people, and then the Russians sort of telling us to scamper out of Syria within an hour, Bubala. That is not, when the world seems to be spinning out of control, the president's party gets hurt. Republicans in 2008, Democrats in 1980.
So this helps every Republican opposition candidate.
It creates a climate, and particularly if Hillary Clinton is the Democratic nominee, as continues to seem likely, she can't say, well, I'm totally apart from the president's foreign policy.
Now let's do one last thing before we go. And it seems that every election cycle, whether the Republican field is strong or whether it's weak, somebody is whispering about their enormous desire to see Michael Bloomberg run for president. And the whisperings have started again. Mike Allen, the influential reporter at Politico, devoted 6 paragraphs of his newsletter to talking about Bloomberg's, in my view, virtually non-existent presidential chances.
I wonder if Mike has been lunching on the Upper East Side of New York, because when you talk to people who are in New York financial, legal circles, political contributors, Democrats, some to Republicans, Michael Bloomberg is the subject that's always on their mind. He's mayor of New York City, and I think largely a successful one for 12 years. That's pretty impressive.
But this talk is basically confined to New York City, isn't it?
I think it's confined to New York City.
Now, you're a former pollster. Do you detect a groundswell out there anywhere for Michael Bloomberg?
Well, I would say that, Michael Bloomberg is perhaps a wine that does not travel. Listen, he's got a lot of money.
Yes.
He is worth
more than Trump.
A lot more. Multiples of Trump.
Trump.
He has a yearly income in the hundreds of millions of dollars. He can self-finance a presidential campaign even more than Donald Trump. He can buy Trump's plane and use it as a backup. So, he's got that, and he's got a public service record as mayor of New York that is impressive and positive and appreciated, I think, by most people in the country. But his positions on gun control make him anathema to Republicans. His support of police tactics in New York City.
All those things that Bill de Blasio wanted to undo.
He's out of sync with the left of the Democratic Party there, and ran against the Democrats for mayor. He's not a good fit with either party, but what would be really interesting is if he ran for the Democratic nomination, and you get Bloomberg versus Trump, the battle of the Trump
billionaires,
Tower
the battle of the billionaires
versus East 79th Street.
One billionaire is not enough in this race, and that is going to be it for us. We hope you'll join us again next time.